everybody, and welcome back. That was my deer in headlights moments this morning. Apologies, it's way too early. Actually, it's 11, so it's not even an excuse. Welcome back to our Facebook Live. My name is Dayana. Remember, I'm a registered psychotherapist.
My name is Richard Back. I'm also a registered psychotherapist qualified.
Yeah, that's like a huge thing for you to say, eh?
It's better than my last name.
Yeah. Don't worry. Hopefully by the end of the year, you can drop the qualifying part.
No.
Yeah.
No. Hopefully by October, because it seems like the CRPO is finally getting on board with coming to the tech era. And anyway, I digress.
Yeah, totally. So for today, we're on a 4-part series talking about relationships and what are the pillars of a relationship and how to make your relationship work. So for today, we're going to be talking about trust. And the interesting thing about trust, because I know last week we spoke about friendship, that the basis of a relationship.
There was a lot of overlap between.
Yeah, and so the basis of a relationship is friendship. And this week we're diving into trust and what does that actually mean in a relationship. And I think what a lot of people don't realize is that in relationships, there's 2 types of trust that you generally work with, right? The first one is fidelity, that your partner isn't sleeping with every Tom, Dick, and Harry, and Juan Bobo that's possibly out there. I like the Juan Bobo part. If you understand Spanish, you understand that reference. And then the second part is when you talk about being able to always rely on your partner. And that is also at the same time trust. And that's a different form of trust, because sometimes you can lose trust with a person in regards to their ability to rely on them. But fidelity-wise, that's not an issue. Nonetheless, if you don't have both working hand in hand, you have a very serious issue.
Mm-hmm. No, for sure. And I think one of the big things that we touched upon was, say, making a distinction between friendship and trust. So when we were looking at friendship, I think we were looking a lot at, say, similar character and personality that, say, draws 2 people together. And then with trust, kind of that idea that, say, being able to open up, being able to be, say, vulnerable with that other person. Not just that, say, we have similar values, we have similar interests, but I can also actually talk to you and actually believe what you're saying.
And I think part of, just how it was written up there, the fidelity and the reliance. And I think if we start off with reliance, that's actually quite important, because this morning as I was getting ready for this, I got reminded of a story that happened back when I was 24. I had this friend who had gotten married, and they'd been married now, I think, about a year. And he had started a new position. He was working as a VP of this company, and she was also working in some other company. But then because of an accident, she actually ended up being off work. And I remember at that time, no lies, I was in school at that time. And I remember when she had this accident, her spouse had asked me to please drop by the house every day and make sure that she was okay, and that somebody, and then in case she needed anything with helping to cook dinner, whatever. And heck, it worked out for me because I was a broke ass, university student. So I got to eat dinner there every night. So somebody fed me. So I was like, sure. So I remember I would drop by every day after school and visit and stay with her until her husband came home, and it would be late in the night. And then one day she had told me a story where she said she had a dream where I think her car broke down or she got lost or something. And she went to a payphone and she said, I have to call Dayana because I know that if I call her, she'll come and get me. And she woke up from this dream really perturbed, because she was like, wait, hold up a second. Why was it I didn't say I need to call my husband because I know that he'll come get me? And she says that dream made her realize that she found that, one, she didn't find her husband reliable on certain things, because what she knew was that every time she would call him, he would never answer his cell phone. Never. He would leave it in the car. He would forget to charge it. He would leave it in the office. The cell phone was literally always somewhere else. And then she also realized that there were other times when she would say, hey, can you come do this with me? He would say, you know what, call Dayana because I'm busy at work. She'll go with you. And she said what she realized was that she ended up moving her reliance from him over to me. Mm-hmm. And she realized that doing that shift was not appropriate, because she was taking the weight of the responsibility that is determined within a relationship off him and putting it on me. And she realized that by doing that, she was not properly putting him in a place to where he should be as a spouse, but she was also relying on somebody else for other things that should still go that way. And don't get me wrong, we all have best friends and friends that we might do things with, who they might be more inept to do things with than maybe our spouses are. But when you're diverting everything to one avenue, that actually became a problem. And she said that that dream was a wake-up call for her to go back to her husband and say, hey, we need to fix stuff here because I can't be relying on her like this, because if it's like that, then why am I married to you and not married to her? Of course, we weren't, there was, and you understand what I mean, right? So she said no, the relationship wasn't like that. It was completely platonic. Still love her to death, but it was completely platonic. She says,
just between you and her.
Yeah. She says, but that was an extreme wake-up call for her. And that dream that she had and that incident always stood in my mind because of the fact was I realized that I remember thinking, oh, you know what? The whole, when I grow up and I end up in a relationship or I get married, I don't ever want to do that, because that was a huge lesson even for me to learn on how you have to be careful that you don't shift into that position for somebody by accident, because it really just all was by accident. Oh, hey, can you come do this with me? Sure. She was an amazing friend to me, so I didn't mind that at all. But I didn't realize that by doing that, I was actually also removing him from a space that he should have been in.
And, I think that's important. I think it's important for her, that she had that sort of revelation in her dream. Excuse me. But I think it's also important, like say, like you as the friend, being able to sort of step back, being able to recognize that, say how that could be causing indirect harm to their relationship, right? And it's interesting that you bring that up, because I think the dynamic is interesting. Like say you and her as friends, right? But I'm wondering what your thoughts are in terms of say in-laws in the house and things like that. Because with you as a friend, right? It's kind of like that's your title. You are the friend, right? And so you're playing the friend role, and he's playing, say, the husband role. She's playing the wife role and everything like that. And it's kind of like this kind of strange dynamic, because you're kind of, in a sense, almost, so to speak, like living in the house with them, right? Like you're kind of this third wheel. But in the case of, like, say, a parent, right? Of course, the role is much different than a friend, right? And I'm wondering, and I've seen this even with clients, and I've seen this even in relationships with, like, say, friends and everything like that, where, say, sometimes parents hold on to, like, say, the parental role, and there's a conflict between, say you as, say, a wife or a husband, and that balancing act between you as a wife or husband and as a son or a daughter, and trying to sort of appease both roles, which is really not always feasible.
So I think that's a really interesting topic, right? Because there's two schools of thought, right? There's a large group of people who believe that living with your parents or living with your in-laws produces a very nucleus family, where you are able to have more of like a richer upbringing, and and it's helpful for your children, or it's helpful for the relationship, whatever. And then there's the others that are like, oh hell no, you live in your house, I live in mine, and we'll come and visit each other. I think when you're talking about living with your parents, look, I haven't lived with my parents since I was like 19 years old, right? And I remember when I moved out the house, all of a sudden being an adult and being an independent adult was fun, because I was able to do things that my mother told me I could never do, like, run around the house with scissors, or like, run around the house without shoes on. You're looking at me very weird, and so is everybody else as I said that.
But yeah, because I probably, even in the office, I don't want you running around with scissors, because I don't think it's safe. I mean, maybe the other staff it's safe, but for you...
But they would tell you that, don't run around the house with scissors. Like, okay, well, I don't actually do that. But then one day when I was living alone, I was like, I could do that now if I wanted to, and I could run around the house without slippers, because my mother was very against us walking around the house without shoes on, right? So I was able to do, like, all these things, and I think... Yeah, I know, totally. And I was able to, if I didn't want to have dinner that night, I could do that. And if I wanted to drink water or have juice that night for dinner, I could do that, and no one was yelling at me. But the problem that happens is if whether you be a guy or girl and you end up getting married and you end up bringing your spouse into your parents' house, whether it be, again, your in-laws or yourself, you create a very unique dynamic, because one, whose house is it? Is it the couple's or is it the parents', right? And then the thing is, now when you're looking at two women, you're looking at the mother-in-law or the mother, and, the daughter or the daughter-in-law. Well, who's in charge of that house? Mm-hmm. If it's your parents' house that you're moving into with your spouse or your partner, that house is technically your parents', not yours. If your parents are moving into your house, that house is technically yours, but nonetheless, who is actually in charge at that point?
And the power dynamic.
Exactly.
Right?
Just ignores that, the power dynamic. And then what happens is, when you're talking about now the parents releasing their grip, it can become very hard, because I think I told you last year I was having a conversation with a parent. They're like in their 70s, and they had said, when I look at my children and I see how my children are raising their children, I always think to myself, you know what? No, I wouldn't be doing it like that. And if it was me, I would do it better. I don't think what they're doing is correct, but whatever, that's their life. And I found that school of thought to be dangerous, because what you're saying is you don't have trust in what your child is doing. Your child could actually be raising their kids correctly, but because it doesn't align with your beliefs, you're now saying that it's incorrect. Well, is it? Or is it not? Mm-hmm. It's hard to tell. So when you're living in that type of dynamic, it's difficult, because when you're also then looking at children who have a very close relationship with their parents. Look, I'm not against a child having a close relationship with their parents, but if you get married and your parents are still your number one, I'm not sure what you got married for. Mm-hmm. You can still be good friends with your parents, and you can be best friends with your parents, but if you're constantly deferring to your parents, oh, my spouse and I are having this problem, what do you think? Really? Okay, yeah, no, you should be going home and saying, hey, you and I have this problem. How can we work this out? Look, I'm not against people seeking outside counsel, and I'm not against people even seeking counsel for people, who have wisdom. But you cannot constantly be deferring to your parents to answer all your problems. Or if your spouse needs you, you're like, no, because I have to go to mother's home today because she needs me, right? As well as parents should also understand that the moment your children get married, you do become number two, and you need to take a step back. And you need to be able to encourage them to develop their relationship and their reliance on each other. Mm-hmm. Because if you continue to see me as your number one, then the truth is, I don't know why you got married, and I don't know why you moved out of my house. Mm-hmm. And if you are living in my house or I'm living in yours, and we have that type of dynamic, you're eventually going to cause a severe collapse in their marital relationship, because you're always going to be integrated in their offering information and or counsel. That's none of your business.
Well, and I think by doing that, you shape the parent's interpretation of whoever your partner is, because you start disclosing information that maybe your partner would prefer you not disclose. But the other problem too is what I've seen sometimes with couples is that, say, if it's, say, the husband and the mother, and so like, say, if you're the wife, it's the mother-in-law, right? That's, say, the one partner expects that, say, you are going to treat them as sort of the same as, well, my mother said this, so, this is what mom said to do, so this is what you should do. But it's kind of like, well, no, I don't want to do that. Or it's kind of like, yeah, but my mom said, and it's kind of like, I don't want to say I don't give a shit what your mother said, but it's kind of like, yeah, but I'm an adult. I kind of run my own life. I don't take directions like that from my own mother. Why am I going to take directions like that from your mother, right? So I think immediately can sometimes cause a conflict, say, between the partners as well, because then they become almost like, it almost becomes like a sibling, kind of dynamic. I from what I've seen with some couples.
And for sure it does. And one of the things I've always said, if you want to ruin your relationship, the first words out of your mouth should be, so my parents think we should, right? And the reason why I say that is because I actually knew someone who, when they were married, their spouse would always come to them and said, so my parents think we should. And finally, the other person responded, look, if you come back and tell me what your parents think, I'm going to burn this house down. I was like, okay, too much. But I understood where they were coming from, because it should never be that, it should say, hey, you and I have a problem, so this is what my parents think we should do. Mm-hmm. Because again, if it's like that, then why just not have a meeting, have a family meeting and everybody discuss your personal business? The other issue you also have when you're living with your parents, and you also brought it up right there, what happens when they're seeing you arguing? Mm-hmm. Again, as a parent, I know there are times that it's not uncommon for parents to take the side of their own natural born child, right? Sure, if the parent is wise, sometimes they can say, hey, you know what? The way my kid is acting right now probably really isn't cool. But normally they'll always try to side with their children, right? Which then at the same time, you're also causing then that other person's half in your eyes to look bad. And then when they make up, in your parents' mind, they're still going to look and say, well, Richard, that partner you have, we really didn't like the way they yelled at you that day. Mm-hmm. You should really do something about that, or we found that really disrespectful. So you're also leaving a bad taste in their mouth of this person who's constantly living there. And again, what can continue to happen is you continue to build a reliance on your parents, and like, you know what, mom, dad, you're right. They should have never spoken to me like that, versus you going off and talking to them about it yourself. Mm-hmm. So if you have,
or I'm sorry if I could even just interject, or you can actually sometimes, what I've seen is the opposite sometimes, where it's sort of like, they're not being a good spouse to you. They're, look at them and sort of making underhanded comments, and sort of the child saying, well, yeah, you think I'm just a moron for marrying them. You think I'm, and then it causes a conflict now between the child and the parent as well.
And remember, and this doesn't have to happen that you're living with them. It could also be that in the same way with the example,
but if they become too enmeshed.
With my friend, this could also be that your parents could be living in another home and you have that enmeshment. And it's funny, I just finished listening to a podcast this week from Dr. Jessica O'Reilly. This was on Wednesday. I was listening to this, and she had, I forgot the name of the girl, but she was talking about enmeshments in relationship. And they were saying, there's a difference to build reliance and trust with your partner in that other way. And then there's the other part where you become enmeshed with them to the point where you can't tell, who starts and who ends. And that can happen with a lot of people, with their parents as well, or with a friendship where, again, you're removing that away from your partner and you're giving that spot to somebody else. So I think when you look at reliance and building that with your partner, you need to be very direct. And I think you've heard me say this before. In every relationship, there are roles that we all have to play, right? And you need to be very direct on what these roles look like. And from there is where you learn how to build trust. But if you're realizing that, okay, you and I are going to do this and talk about this, but for everything else, I'm going to go to my parents, that's where you start to break down the dynamics. And then you really have to ask yourself, why is it they trust their parents over me, or their friends over me? Why is what I'm not saying not trustworthy?
Yeah. And I think that's sort of comes to sort of the basis of the conversation today in terms of, say, trust, right? And like, don't get me wrong, it's not kind of like, you need to be sort of fanatical with your partner in terms of, say, like, I trust everything they say and I don't care what anybody else says.
I can't breathe without your direction.
Exactly, right? So it's kind of like, maybe you have a parent who, you trust with, say, I don't know, appliances and mechanicals more than, say, your partner, because your partner's sort of out to lunch and so are you, right? And then that's fine, whatever, right?
But that's not going to make or break your relationship.
No, exactly. But if it's kind of like, and this is also why I brought up parents, right? Because one of the I from what I've seen.
Hold on, but to cut you off, but with that being said, you should also first ask your partner before you go off and call your parents. Hey, do you think you could fix this, or should I call somebody? Because if you automatically divert it to somebody else, you're also telling your partner, look, I think you're a moron, and I'm not even going to bother asking you.
True.
Right?
But why I also brought up parents is because what I oftentimes hear with couples as well is big complaints are kids, financing, parents, and sex. Those are like big ones that I hear couples complain about. And it's funny because I find sometimes they'll all kind of come together, right? Where it's, say, when it comes to parents and children, for instance, right? Where it's kind of like, like you were saying, my parents say we're raising the kids wrong, or things like that, right? And what I've seen sometimes with couples as well is one spouse will get upset because they'll be like, well, I had these kids and I want to raise them, but I feel like my mother-in-law or my father-in-law or my mother and father-in-law are raising them and not me. I'm not getting the chance because my spouse is saying, well, this is how we should do it because this is what my mother says, or this is what my father says, or this is what my parents say, and things like that, which then I think leads into that sort of idea of, say, trust, right? Where it's kind of like, I think like you were saying, well, why did you leave home? Why did you bother marrying, say, this other person, or even getting into a relationship with this person if you don't really trust anything they say?
Right. And so when you look at a relationship, that's exactly the key thing, right? It's the trust, and it comes out through the reliance, right? It should be that I should go to my partner and I should be able to tell them, look, this is X, Y, and Z, what's happening. How can we, deal with this problem? If you realize within each other that you can't, then yes, that's when you will then go seek outside sources, right? Like I have many couples that tell me, look, we have this problem. And I say, look, you should guys consider getting marriage counseling. No, we don't. We could fix it on our own. How's that working for you then? Well, it's not. Okay. There, that should end that conversation, right? That's when you should consider. Again, if your dishwasher breaks and you know your partner know how to fix it, well, you could tinker with it and break it more, or you could call someone, or maybe even call one of your parents or your in-laws who might know something and have them fix it, right? It should always be that you should both first seek within each other to see if you can clear up that situation. And if you can't, then you go to an outside source.
Mm-hmm.
Any other way, you are actually not giving your partner the space or yourself to see if you both can brainstorm the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where parents can become a serious problem if you're constantly deferring to them for everything, which again, go back to it. And I always say this to people: if you're going to cohabitate or you're going to get married, you need to really ask yourself, what are my roles and responsibility in this relationship? And if I can't fulfill them, then I need to be real careful what I'm doing here, because then I'm either going to end up moving back to my parents' house on my own or getting a divorce. And it's generally what happens, because for every time I do couples counseling and I ask people about their roles and their responsibilities, they seem to be all over the damn place. And in many times they don't have some. And when they do, again, someone else who's not their partner is fulfilling them, mm-hmm. which again, it is just as bad. So when you look at reliance should also be, though, that if I go to you and I say, hey, Richard, here's a problem that's going on, what do you think we should do? You should be able to respond back to me in a proper form of communication and also be able to give me ideas. If you show that you are uninterested, if you show that you don't care, or if you show that you just shut down and you completely stonewall, that is a problem as well, because then that means whenever I have an issue, I can't trust you because you're probably not going to care or you're never going to come through. Mm-hmm. Then I am going to go, then unfortunately the person will end up going somewhere else. And the problem that happened in this situation, which occurred like almost 20 years ago with my friend, it was that whenever they would ask their spouse, hey, I need you for something, can you whatever? And the spouse would say, sure, I'll be there. And then they just wouldn't show up. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't that they were doing it on purpose. It was just business and life and everything got in the middle. But if everything is always constantly getting in the middle, again, then you have to ask yourself, was I too busy to get married? Mm-hmm. And should have I continued, in just a dating relationship or being single where I could look after my own affairs? Because if my own affairs are that busy, then that means I really am too busy for someone else. Like a conversation, remember yesterday we were having with our staff. If someone is too busy for psychotherapy, that doesn't mean it's anything bad. It just means they're just too busy. Simple as that. So you have to be really realistic in a relationship, because if you're constantly too busy, then you cannot be reliable. And if you cannot be reliable, you're constantly going to let your partner down, which again will cause contempt.
Well, and I think this actually kind of shifts into another topic in terms of, say, trust is, of course, these days as well, everybody's, empowered and everything like that. And they can, self-direct, and they don't need to hear it from anybody else. They can do it all on their own, right? And you hear me oftentimes, I bring the fire team concept into sort of everything in life, right? But it's kind of like that idea that, say, I don't really need to trust anybody because I can just do it all on my own. I don't have to trust my partner. I can just figure it out all by myself. And I think that can be extremely problematic as well. I know we've been talking about I'm just going to put all my trust into my friends, or I'm going to put all my trust into my family members versus, say, my partner. How about I'm not really going to trust anybody, because if I'm asking, say, my partner for advice, or if I'm asking my partner for help, it just must mean that, say, I'm giving my power over to them, right? That, say, I'm no longer making choices anymore because I have to sort of, ask for something.
Look, I've always said it. If you believe you don't need anybody in your life, not only is that extremely selfish, but then you're also almost acting like a little demigod. I don't need anybody because I can do it all myself because I'm perfect and I can handle it well. That's a lie from the pit of hell, right? Because we all need people for something. I need the cashier to cash me out. Any other way, I can't buy whatever I need, whether it be medication or whether it be an eye shot. It really doesn't matter, right? The point is that person I need. And I think people don't realize that we all need people in our lives for certain functions. Now, if you're in a relationship and you're telling yourself, oh, I don't need my partner, then why are you in a relationship? Mm-hmm. Right? And again, I'm not saying you need this partner to breathe air. I'm not saying you need this partner to eat or to do your normal daily functions, right? Unless you're of diminished capacity or you've had an accident, you should be able to do all these things on your own. But for the emotional aspect, yes, if you have a partner, you're there because they're fulfilling something that you on your own cannot get, which is, companionship, which is a deep source of a friendship. So when you look at these these words that people use. And when someone says, well, no, I don't need them, then of course they're not going to trust you, and you're not going to build any form of trust with them, because why should I trust something I don't need? I'm not invested in it then.
No,
So if
exactly.
I have no investment in it, then what does it matter?
Well, and I think the problem too is, like, say with a concept like vulnerability, right? I can be vulnerable with somebody. Well, if I'm vulnerable with somebody, obviously I'm not empowered, right? Because I'm strong and independent, and I don't need anybody, you know. And you know, one thing I definitely learned in the military is that, say, we gathered strength through our acceptance of vulnerability, right? Because it was that idea that, say, I can rely on my fire team partner. That, say, I rely on them in terms of, say, I know that they have my best interests in mind. They are going to keep me alive just as much as I'm going to keep them alive. And it was that idea that, say, you know, in a dangerous environment, I'm going to die if I'm on my own, versus my fire team partner. We got a much better chance of accomplishing the mission and making it through.
Yeah. And that's why trust is so important, because now in a normal relationship, hopefully no one's going to die without their, their partner. But again, if you
No,
guys,
but I'm saying you can see the analogy, right?
But if you guys are like living together, whether it be, again, cohabitation or marriage, there's things you both need from each other, like financial, spiritual, emotional, physical. Again, these are things that no one is going to come and help pay my mortgage if they're not living with me, right? So why would I need that from someone else? But from my partner, potentially, right? So these are just simple things. But then if we look at the emotional, it should be, now I'm gonna hate to use this word, but I'm gonna use it for the moment. It should be that your home should be a safe space for you, right? With the exception of maybe the bathroom, everything else should be a safe space for you, where and we'll explain later why we laugh at this one, but it should be a safe space for you, where you should be able to go home and talk to your partner about whatever it is that's going on, and your partner should be able to, support you and comfort you, versus attacking you and leaving you left without that support.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is why trust starts actually from words. And one of the things I recently saw was, I was reading something from John Goffman, and he was saying, when your partner comes up to you and says, hey, you know what, this is what's going on with me right now, you should be able to stop everything you're doing and say, okay, tell me what's up, versus, yeah, you know what, I'm going to keep this game watching, but I'm listening to you. Or I'm going to keep tapping away on my phone, but don't worry, I'm listening to you. Actually, if your partner's telling you something that's heartbreaking or something, or even if they just had a bad day, many times all they need is 5 minutes. And for 5 minutes, turning off the television or putting your phone down won't actually kill you. Mm-hmm. Because what you're saying is, okay, yeah, you're important, but not totally important, because I can't stop what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. Again, if you're in the middle of cooking, may not be the best time to bring up that conversation, right? But if there's nothing hazardous or immediate that you're in the middle of doing, you should be able to just sit with them and say, hey, tell me, I'm here. And that builds reliance, and that builds trust. Because then the person feels like, okay, I've been heard. They'll give me proper feedback without being distracted. And then the conversation will probably be over. In many cases, the reason why conversations go on and on is because there is a distraction going around, and they feel like the other person isn't hearing them. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, if the person doesn't feel that they can come home and be open and safe about what they're talking about, then again, they're going to go maybe to their parents or to their best friends or someone else who will give them what they're not getting from home. And mm-hmm. that right there can eventually, if you're talking about, now we're going to go into fidelity, you can constitute emotional or physical cheating. Mm-hmm. What a lot of people don't realize is that emotional cheating actually does exist. In many cases, and I actually had a case like that once with a patient years ago, the spouse never physically did anything with the other individual, but they did have an emotional affair with that person, because they realized at home their spouse was not paying attention to them, was not giving them anything. So they were part of a club, and they ended up meeting somebody there. And by meeting them there, they ended up becoming friends. And out of that friendship grew an emotional romance. And this person did fall in love with that other individual. Eventually, the spouse found out, and I can't remember how. I don't know if the person left, if they handed their phone over to their what?
Thunderdome.
What's that?
You put them both in a room. 2 go in, 1 comes out.
I think it was because the spouse had handed their phone over to them to look at something, and a text message came through. Like, I can't fully remember. Nonetheless,
that seems a lot less interesting than my option. But
yeah, no. Nonetheless, the individual was very hurt, and they started going through the text messages and saw this, and they confronted their spouse. and the spouse admitted, like, yes, I am in love with that other person, yes, this and that, and blah blah blah. So when, not the spouse that was emotionally cheating, but the other spouse, we'll call them Randy. When Randy came in, Randy was like, Dan, I don't get it. Like, this person that they're having this emotional affair with, they described how they look like, and they're like, look at me, look at them. Why would they go for them? And I was like, oh, sweetheart, you're still missing the point here.
Mm-hmm.
It was never about looks or that. It was about the emotional connection that they were getting from them that they were not getting from you. And if you're still only seeing that, then you're totally missing why your spouse cheated on you in the first place.
Well, and I think when you highlight the emotional connection, I think that's critical, right? And the reason why I also say that is because, again, people would probably get sick of me saying, again, like fire teams and everything like that. But interestingly, if you look at, say, relationships in the military, oftentimes you'll find many veterans, many military members, many authors will comment how the relationship between soldiers is a very unique one, and that there's very few, if any, that are pretty much the same.
Yeah.
And there is that emotional connection that you have with that other person, because, again, as I said, we by accepting that we're vulnerable, we become strong, because I accept that I'm completely vulnerable without you, because sure, I've got my senses, I can see and things like that, but I don't have a 360-degree rotation, but we do as a team, right? And it's kind of that idea that, say, that emotional connection. I can be completely vulnerable with you. I can completely trust you. I can trust you with my life, right? And that's what I think in many cases with, again, a good fire team, a good section, that's why that emotional connection is so deep, because of that vulnerability and because of that deep trust.
And remember,
right?
Vulnerability doesn't mean that the person won't fail you.
No.
It just means that they won't go out of their way to maliciously hurt you, because nobody's perfect. So there are times you are going to trust your partner with something, and whatever it is you trusted them with just didn't work out.
I'm sorry, I wanted to cut you off because you had I don't think it was a quote original from you. I think it was from somebody else. I'm not sure, but you said something a while back that that stuck with me, and it was something to the extent that, say, I can trust you knowing that you could destroy me, but I know that you won't.
Oh, no, yeah, I read that in a yoga magazine when I was going to yoga that day.
Oh, God, now I wish I didn't bring it up.
You like yoga. You tried it before. You told me it was great. Okay, so in the magazine, it said, being in love means, what it means is knowing the person that you are in love with. You're trusting them, knowing that while they can completely destroy you, they won't.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what it is to put, your heart in the hands of somebody else. Because you're right, and exactly what you're saying. In a healthy relationship, again, a lot of people have this really bad habit, like, I trusted you and you failed me. But again, you got to look at it. Was that malicious, or was that just because it just simply didn't work out? Nothing is perfect. Mm-hmm. As an example, I was talking with a friend of mine last weekend, and she had said something you need to keep in mind is that when you give somebody an apology, when you forgive someone for something they've done, and let's say they go back and do it again, and you turn around and say, oh, you see, I forgave you, and then you go back at it again. And she was saying that's the most dangerous thing you can do, because when you forgive someone for something they've done, again, and my my stance on forgiveness, it's not about me letting you go for, like saying, okay, everything you did was okay. It's about me letting you go out of my anger and my hate for whatever it is that happened. But she was saying, but that doesn't mean that the person that you were saying, okay, you know what, I forgive you for what you did, meaning that's going to all of a sudden change your behavior. That has nothing to do with you. Your behavior is still on you. Mm-hmm. It just means that I'm releasing you from this anger. But if you go off and do it again, that has nothing to do with me. That's you dealing with you. And me forgiving you does not constitute a behavioral change. Mm-hmm. Because again, I don't control you. It only constitutes on me and how I'm dealing with my behavior towards yours.
Well, because I want to say pretty much almost every emotion is a social emotion, that there's an interaction with somebody else, just like a behavior like forgiveness, right? But at base, just like an emotion, it's internal, right? It's me. I'm experiencing that emotion, just like forgiveness. Forgiveness is really more for me than it is for you, because as you said, I'm releasing myself that say, whether or not you apologize or not, if I can forgive in terms of, say, allowing myself to be released from it. And I think you mentioned on an earlier Facebook Live about somebody who had been, I think, raped, and they were too afraid to leave the house. And they were saying something to the extent that, say, I'm in prison, but I needed to understand that, say, I needed to sort of let go because I need to.
Yes, and she wasn't forgiving her rapist for what she did. She was just basically saying, I'm not holding on to this anger, hate, because that's what's keeping me captive.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying she forgave me, but I'm just saying it's that idea that I just gotta release myself.
And so that's what happens when you look at, affairs. And in this aspect, what was happening with this individual patient was just simply that they, in their mind, they kept basing their why their spouse would have done this to them based on what the person looked like, but they realized it had nothing to do with that. It had to do with their spouse felt that they, again, we'll call him Randy was not there for them emotionally or mentally or spiritually or physically, and they felt that their spouse had purposely now gone out and failed them. Because in part, what a lot of people don't realize is that in many aspects of relationship, we are purposely failed. When someone says, oh, well, I didn't mean to, it isn't so much about what you meant to. It's about knowing that you had a role to fulfill and you didn't do it. No difference than when you're at work. If you're at work and you've been given a role to fulfill and you're not doing it, you are purposely failing your role. Mm-hmm. You could say, oh, but I'm not trying to be malicious. Well, nobody said anything about you being malicious. It's about, you being responsible. Yeah, you are not being responsible. So therefore, it constitutes you purposely failing your role. And a lot of people have a lot of hard time, admitting to that. So in this relationship, he was purposely failing his role by completely neglecting his wife. And it was only until he saw that was he able to then repair the relationship. And naturally, yes, did it constitute the wife going off and having an emotional affair with someone else? Absolutely not. But as you know, my professor said, but if you're being fed at home, then why are you eating at your neighbor's house? Mm-hmm. If you're going to put somebody in an emotional anorexic state and you're saying, okay, we're married, so you can't get what I'm supposed to give you from anyone else, but I'm not giving it to you either, then I'm starving you. Mm-hmm. So how is that okay? Again, doesn't constitute you going off doing what you're doing. But after having enough couples and dealing with enough affairs, I can tell you that I can understand and see why it occurs.
Well, and I think it comes back to that vulnerability in the sense of, say, I know, I'm kind of alluding to what we're going to be talking about next week about communication, but it's kind of that idea that, say, if I learn that I can't be vulnerable with you and communicate about, say, a need and a want I have, like, again, whether it's emotional intimacy in the terms of, say, us spending meaningful time together, sexual intimacy, any kind of intimacy, I can't bring it up to you, because if I do, you're just going to shoot it down and you're going to be maybe offensive to me or things like that. Like, you're going to say, like, oh my God, all you want is attention, or, oh, you're just a horn dog or something like that, right? Then I'm going to learn I can't bring those topics up to you. So as you said, I'm going to go find somewhere where I can, or divert that energy into another behavior, which may be productive, may be problematic, but in most cases, I think tends to be problematic.
Yeah, and then when you look into the aspect of sex, right? So with affairs, I've noticed
which
there's
kind
two
of
types.
The very last.
Yeah.
Topic,
and then I mean infidelity.
Oh, okay. I see.
Infidelity. So when you look at infidelity, right? Because now we're talking about emotional infidelity and sexual infidelity.
Okay.
When you look at sexual infidelity, there's two types that I have seen. There's a type where you have the individual that basically is constantly having sex with just anybody and everybody while they are in a committed relationship, which I always question, why is that occurring, right? Mm-hmm. And then you have the others that do end up having an affair with someone else. But if you look at them, you realize that when you talk to them, the reason why they were having this affair is because there was something there that was sorely being missed in the current relationship they were in. And they did not have the, I don't know, the courage or whatever it was to be able to break up that relationship, or they were hoping maybe something would be fixed. But unfortunately, they got caught now in this one. And I've noticed that with those individuals, if feelings develop with that other person, 100% that can get very complicated. But when you sit and talk to them, you never hear them say, well, look, I went out and cheated because I needed sex and I just didn't get it. I've never really had someone tell me that out of their mouth, with the exception of the serial, the serial cheaters. Those are completely different. Normally what you hear is, the emotional connection that I needed in my whether it be whatever relationship I'm in, I was not getting. And because of that, unfortunately, I didn't seek to go find it. It is just something that developed with somebody else, in the same way emotional affairs develop. And when you look at that, you realize that many people want to point the fingers to the person that cheated and say, well, look at that. They're such a dirtbag, how they could do that. But they don't actually realize that when an affair occurs, it's actually both people's fault. Both people are to blame for that, because very rarely have I ever seen a relationship where the spouse that didn't cheat was 100% perfect, 100% doing everything, and the other spouse was just an asshole and just decided to have an affair for the hell of it. You look at them both and you realize that there was deep fundamental flaws and cracks in that relationship that they were both presently ignoring. Because I've never had anybody say, well, I didn't realize we had these problems. I mean, we were just perfect. No, they'll eventually admit, yeah, we had these problems. They'll say, I didn't think it was that bad. And again, they were presently ignoring what was happening, and they didn't classify them as being that bad, because in their mind, they were so caught up with everything else. And then these affairs occur. And what I realized, it's actually both people to blame. Because both people had a hand in that, in the breakdown, not of the affair, but in the breakdown of the relationship that eventually led them to go both in their own ways.
No, and I would agree. I mean, of course, I think you brought up a really good caveat as well, in terms of, say, like serial cheaters and things like that as well, where, say,
they seek to find.
I was going to say they.
It's like a sport.
In that case, it's sort of like there's nothing really the partner can sometimes do, so to speak, in terms of, say, it might not be like, say, well, I want to have sex every single day, and my partner's like, sure, okay, fine, I can do that, but it's not that I want sex every single day from you. I want sex every single day from you.
Yeah.
So then
it's like a way for you get a prize and you get a prize and we all get a prize.
You get a mistress. You get a mistress. You get a mistress. So
collect them like harems.
So I think in those cases, it becomes a lot more difficult in terms of, say, for the partner who's being cheated on. Yeah. Because in that case, it's sort of like, well,
in that case, whether you're a shitty partner or not really doesn't matter. It's the one who's constantly having the affair that has the deep fundamental problem.
That's what I was going to say. Where, say, no relationship is perfect, but even if they can be sort of as blameless as possible, right? In terms of, they're trying to meet the needs and wants, they're trying to be a good partner and everything like that, but their spouse is just, running off in every single direction. That's sometimes that can be a case as well, right? Where it doesn't matter what kind of changes, say, the spouse makes, if their partner is just seeking that sort of sexual interaction, those kind of casual encounters. Sometimes, there's nothing that
and in many of those cases, I found the individual to have either a personality disorder or a mood disorder. I've very rarely found someone who's completely well put together, and they're like, I just like cheating on my partner with everybody and potentially catching an STD because I think it's fun. I've never had that. Generally, the more I dive into with this individual, I realize that there is some form of mental health issue that's there, and it's being released through.
Oh, for sure.
This behavior.
Sometimes I think I found like self-esteem issues and things like that, feelings of worthlessness and things that they need that constant gratification. Yeah,
that's right. So whenever I hear someone say, "Oh, so and so had an affair," I don't think, "Oh God, what a dog," or "What a bitch she is." I'm kind of like, "Well, what happened there?" Because it's not as cut and dry as people think. But then when you look at the other side, for the couples where no one is being a serial cheater, but there is just an affair that occur. Again, you got to dive into both of them and try to find where those cracks are. Because as I stated earlier, I've never found one where that spouse is just perfect and the other one just decided to mess everything up for no reason. There are, for example, where, yes, again, if the other person has a mental health issue and that's what occurred, again, different story. And again, even if it was just with one person, but the mental health issue, helped direct that way, again, something different. But when you're looking at where commonly there is two individuals in a relationship, the relationship is deeply flawed and no one wants to take a look at it, I see how those things then start to occur. Because when an individual starts to feel neglected, let's put it like this. Think about if you were working a job, right? And you got hired for this job and you really like your job, but your job is neglecting you. Your job isn't paying you right. Your job isn't treating you well. Your job, X, Y, and Z. You know what happens? What happens to all of us? We end up looking for another job. We start putting resumes out there. We start looking for different employment. Why? Because we want to eventually divorce ourselves from this job and go find another workplace that will fulfill what this job is currently lacking. Well, that's no different than being in a romantic relationships with someone where you feel, again, I'm not being fed here, so why am I here? The problem, though, that makes it more difficult is that a lot of people either are scared, or if you have children involved, or if you're married, or if you have assets or whatever, to break up that relationship and then either move on with the other person or just move on themselves. And the issue where that happens, the person then starts to feel trapped, and it can become very, very difficult. And this is why I always tell people, when I've had people finally come in, when they talk about what's occurred, you always hear that it was this severe breakdown. They felt trapped. They didn't know what to do. And unfortunately, the situation occurred that way. And so this is why I always tell people, if you're caught in that, you definitely should seek counseling so you can figure out what is your best route. Either you correct this, stop the affair, and sort this out with your spouse, or you end the affair and you move on with your life, or you go with the person you're having the affair with and you end your current relationship. Like, there are 3 options there, but you can't write the line, because then you end up lying. And when you get caught, it's even worse, because then everybody will know and everybody will look at you like, what a dirtbag. Why would he do that?
See, I think one of the big problems that occur is that, say, especially when there's difficulties between couples, right? Oftentimes, I find, and I suspect you probably find the same thing with the clients that you have, is that you'll get couples who come in and they'll talk about what's going on in their life, but you'll get a lot more individuals which will talk about all the shitty things that are going on with their partner, and their partner's not there, right? So of course everything has to be taken with a grain of salt, or with a wheelbarrow of salt.
And don't you just love it when they throw it in there? Oh yeah, and by the way, they cheated on me at some point. You're like, whoa, where did that come out of?
Yeah, but
all the time. I'm like,
but where I was going with that is that, say, if say you can recognize that there's a problem in your relationship, and you talk to your therapist, right? And you're not talking to your spouse, your partner, who, whatever the arrangement is. I think again, that speaks highly to trust, and again, alluding to next week's conversation on communication, right? Because like you said, if you're noticing that there's these problems, right? And you guys are trying to figure it out, and then you guys sort of decide, look, we have to speak to a therapist. How do you even get to that point if, say, we're not even communicating? Because I don't feel like I can trust talking to you, because I feel like, again, you're going to say, oh, we can sort this out. We don't need a therapist or things like that. I'm just basically shooting down all the ideas. Then it's sort of like, then I learn, okay, well then, I can't talk to the spouse. So I'll just give the therapist all of my evaluations of the relationship without my partner being present, right? Because my partner doesn't want to engage, because I can't have that communication with them, because again, I can't trust that I can open up this serious dialogue with them, because it does just turn into a monologue, right?
It does.
We just talk. They just talk.
But then you have to treat the marriage like a sick patient who's dying. You either take this medication, or this patient will die. You kind of got to treat the marriage, or the relationship. If you're not willing to go to counseling with me, we're not willing to fix this, then this relationship more than likely should be over, because it's dying. And as to how many times we can revive it, we're probably out. And sometimes you got to take that drastic measure and to be able to look at it. But here's the thing as well, though. If, let's say, and this is the part I was going to get to where the trust builds in, if you catch your partner having an affair and you decide to stay with them, and you go through counseling, which you really should, once you're done with counseling and you realize you're going to stay with them, you actually have to let it go. Because the biggest issue you'll have in relationships is that they'll keep bringing up, well, Richard, that one time 150 years ago when you cheated on me, and then it's like, oh shit, and here we go again, right? And what ends up happening is that you've never built trust with this person. If you realize 3 years later you're still checking their emails, their phones, their text messages, everything, then you still haven't built trust. And a relationship without trust is actually a dead relationship. Because then if you're constantly wondering, what are they doing? What are they thinking? Who they're with? If you have absolutely no trust in them, then why are you together? I recently saw a funny meme where this guy and this girl were lying in bed, and they were she was lying on one side, he was lying on the other. And in the meme, the girl said, I bet you he's thinking about that bitch that he met last week. And it said ... And then the guy saying, so I was wondering, if the Israelites wandered through the desert for 40 years, why is it then ... And it was like really funny, because what it was basically saying is that you know, if you're in that type of relationship where this is one person constantly, you know, thinking you're doing X, Y, and Z versus the other person really is sitting there and not doing anything, again, you have no trust and you're actually breaking down the relationship. So the important thing is that when you're looking at trust from any angle, whether it be on reliance or infidelity, if you have, again, forgiven the person, then in you need to move on as if though the situation no longer exists, and you're putting faith in them that things will continue to work forward. Again, if they fail you, that's not on you, that's on them. But for you, you have to move on in a different mindset, because if you're constantly dragging that with you, then you're actually not adding anything positive to the relationship. You're actually continuing to live in the time point.
Yeah, but think of it this way too, though. You're talking about, again, that meme, right? So, you know, she's saying, oh, I guess, you know, he's thinking about that bitch or whatever, and he's thinking about something completely different, right? So, but think the way I look at it is, you know, if you're behaving this way where you have no trust in your partner, and your partner senses that and believes that, think about the quality of the relation. Both parties are actually under a lot of stress, right? Because you're stressed because you think your partner's out fantasizing about, you know, 100 other people, and they're stressed because they're constantly thinking, look, and again, when I talk about them being stressed, I'm talking about somebody who's, you know, genuinely trying to, say, work on the relationship, try to build that trust and everything like that. And they're thinking to themselves, Christ, I fucking try everything and nothing is good enough for them. What a fantastic way to harbor resentment between both people in a relationship.
And that's why when you're talking about infidelity, whether it be emotional or physical, you have to build your parameters as to what you want to live in, right? Mm-hmm. So let's say the individual cheats and they say, okay, going forward for the next 6 months, I'll give you the passwords to my phone, my emails, whatever. You can check it whenever you want, right? But you got to set a time limit. But if in those 6 months, you find that the individual hasn't done anything and you can't find anything and it satisfies, then you need to relinquish that, you know, that power you have over them and give it back to them and stop looking. Because if you continue to, after those 6 months that you agreed on, then 1, those 6 months were a waste of time. 2, you've never actually built trust. And 3, this person is going to be your prisoner for the rest of their life. Mm-hmm. Right? So again, it's no different than in a job. If you fuck up, they put you on probation, right? And they watch everything you do because now they're looking to make sure that you were following cause. No different in a relationship. If you screw up like that, yeah, you do lose your privacy because it was with privacy that you broke the relationship. So now you no longer have privacy. But again, if you say, look, I'll give you what you want for the next 3 to 6 months, but after that, it has to stop. And if it doesn't, then you need to seek either deciding to break up or you have to other some form of deeper measures to correct this. But even if after that it still doesn't work, then you need to move on because then this person will never trust you no matter what you do. And as you said, there is no point in being that when you will continue to harbor resentment because it's going to go from, look, I'm doing everything to get you to trust me to, you know what, screw yourself. If you don't trust me, then fine, don't trust me. Go screw yourself. I want nothing else to do with you. Mm-hmm. And then that's where the resentment will build and build and build. Mm-hmm. But that's where you have to start being honest with yourself and also be able to accept the parameters that you built. And if you're going to live within them, you have to be able to carry those on as time goes on. If not, then again, you can't be like, look, 150 years ago when you did X, Y, and Z. Mm-hmm. And that's why the reliance part is so important with that infidelity part, right? Because if I trust you and everything else, I should be able to trust you in this, even if you did fail me for whatever reason.
Yeah, it's a pretty good place to tie up the Facebook Live.
Mary made a comment. She says, society has made it so that people don't need people. Self-checkouts, automatic meds, refill, and so on. Isolation is the norm when you are alone and conditions to not trust ourselves, let alone others. But yes, we all need to physically be emotionally motivated and recognize to live a healthy lifestyle. And yeah, Mary, I totally agree with you.
Sure.
Excuse me, you're right. Well, we do have self-checkouts and everything is automatic. Human beings are not. Human beings are made to be social creatures. And I know people always talk about things being replaced with robots, but love, no matter how smart you make a robot, will never, ever be that as of a human. And those genuine human emotional connections that we have with people, I don't think we'll ever be able to build with someone. And this is why when I see a lot of people who are gamers and they constantly have only relationships online, they are losing a massive aspect of what is to have that human connection. So whenever someone tells me, look, I have a romantic relationship online with somebody and I've never met them in person, I'm like, okay, careful, because what you have is basically a pen pal who everybody's is just putting their best face forward on writing. But it's only when you see someone in person, and I think you've heard me say this before, and it's only when you have your first fight do you really realize who this person is.
Mm-hmm.
On text message and on phone, it's a whole different aspect than when this person is physically incarnated in front of you.
Mm-hmm. No, for sure. And I'll oftentimes say the same thing, that again, we are social creatures, right? And we all want, to a certain degree, privacy, but that interaction is key. I oftentimes find more people struggling with that sense of isolation than people saying, like, I just need to get the hell away from everybody.
Yeah, and isolation too. And this is why in a relationship, it's very dangerous to be isolated in a relationship, because again, you're trapping me. I can't go do these things with other people, but now I'm in this relationship isolated. It's like living in a big house and only being quarantined to one single room.
Yeah.
But you have no access for the rest of the house, even though it's your house, but you have no access. Yeah. That is a dangerous space to be in. And eventually, like all humans, just like animals, you cage them up, eventually, they will revolt, right? And then that's what causes these infidelities in relationships to occur. And then remember, it doesn't only have to be just a romantic infidelity. It could also be you moving that reliance over, or that emotional connection over, to a friend. And now you're having that, not romantic, but just that connection with a friend that you should be having with your partner.
Yeah, excellent point, Mary.
Yeah, and then Maribel wrote, I love how dreams reveal unconscious thoughts. Not the subject of this talk, but still, You know what, actually, Maribel, to that point of that, yeah, it is true. Dreams are actually pretty interesting, because when you actually dig deep into them, many times they will reveal a lot of things. And for that friend of mine, it revealed that there was a crack in the relationship that she needed to fix, and she did. And that was actually quite amazing that she was able to do that. So I always tell people, when you have a dream and it seems out there, sometimes they really are, and other times they are trying to simply tell you something that you just need to pay attention to.
Agree.
Anyway, guys, really appreciate you guys watching our Facebook Live today. And for next week, we will be talking about communication and how we can. And right now, it sounds like I'm communicating wrong.
I was going to say, it sounds like you're really struggling.
I was thinking, like, wait, what is it? About communication and how to effectively talk to your partner with the proper language and words that you need, versus what we think or what lately we've been taught to do in mainstream media. And then the week after that, we'll be talking about sex and why sex is important in a relationship. And again, we're not talking about sex tips. We're talking about sex in general and how it can make or break a relationship.
And if I could actually quickly just go back to communication, I think one thing for listeners to really try to keep in mind is, oftentimes when we talk about, or like the topic of communication, we're thinking about the ability to speak, to articulate words. But a lot of, I think, what we're going to be talking about with communications is that ability to actually hear, that active listening that's essential with communication, that oftentimes people focus too much on the speaking component. We got 2 eyes, 2 ears, but 1 mouth. Probably best to use some of those other senses when it comes to communication.
Yeah, for sure. All right, guys, I hope you guys have a good weekend, and thanks for watching.